Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Kamla, and I'm working as a consultant in glaucoma services at Shankara Eye Hospital, Shimoga. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Rajiv, the scientific committee chairman, Dr. Shashi Kumar, and Dr. Chandrasekhar for this opportunity given. I will be talking about the chapter on care of patients, the interpretation of the standards and objective elements in this particular chapter. So the overview of the chapter is that it has 11 standards and 54 objective elements. So coming to each standard element one by one. So COP1 says that the care delivery is uniform and it's guided by established and standard guidelines. So it has about four objective elements. So the gist of the objective elements is that the care delivery is to be uniform in all the settings. Like in many hospitals, there are camp services, there are subsidized services, there are paying services. So in care, the care delivery has to be common in all the settings. The care and the treatment orders have to be signed, named, timed, and dated by the concerned doctor or staff. And the prescription format should be as given as by the MCI. So there has to be name, the MRN number, date has to be there, time has to be there, the prescription has to be in capital letters, the exact I which has to be used, the timing which has to be at which the drugs have to be used is to be written. How many bottles or how many tablets has to be procured by the patient also should be written in the prescription. And at the end of it, you have to the doctor has to sign the prescription, and which has to be affixed with a seal with the medical council number. So you have to use only standardized abbreviations. You should have a list of abbreviations which are used in your place, and only those standardized abbreviations should be used. And the care should be based on the evidence-based medicines, the clinical practice guidelines, and they should be adopted totally. And all the internationally accepted protocols should be used. Coming to COP2, the emergency services, including ambulance, are guided by documented policies, procedures, applicable laws, and regulations. So there are 5 objective elements in this. So you should have SOPs for handling general emergency and ophthalmic emergency, that is for both adult and pediatric cases. Coming to the medical legal cases, the organization should define what is a medical legal case, and the same should be documented as a policy or a manual. And triage also should be should be documented as a policy. There should be trained individuals who can execute this triage. There should be disaster management training, code training, like there could be a code yellow, code red. So there should be code training. Competency feedback loop should be established. So if there is one code which has happened, and you should analyze the code and see if the people in the team were competent enough to give the desired result during the code. And trainings for identifying the eye emergencies, medical emergencies, like basic CPR training should be done by the institute. So admission and discharge to home or transfer to the other eye care organization, the policies should be well documented. Ambulance, again, it depends upon the scope of the services. So in small setups, you may have a MOU. You may not have your own ambulance, but you can have an MOU. It should be equipped with basic life support, and equipment for both adult and pediatric patients should be available. The driver should be trained in basic CPR and with a valid driving license. There should be a daily checklist for vehicle, equipment, medications, and first aid box. And also there should be a fire extinguisher checklist in the ambulance. Coming to the next standard, that is documented procedures guide the care of the patients who require CPR. So in this, there are 3 objective elements. So the objective elements, how you understand them, goes as follows. So there should be documented policies which guide the uniform use of CPR in all the departments of the hospital, and they should be implemented in all the areas of the hospital. And all the protocols, the CPR protocols, should be prominently displayed in the areas where these kind of eventualities are likely to happen. And periodic CPR trainings are to be arranged. So 6 monthly once training is fair enough. So you should identify the staff and the new staff who are there, and you should arrange periodic CPR trainings. And there should be a proper documentation of events in case there is a actual event or even for a mock drill. There should be a proper documented CPR analysis form. Which includes the timeliness of the response, availability of the manpower, equipment, drugs, and any problems faced during the whole procedure. And there should be a predefined procedural checklist. Coming to COP4, which says that documented procedures define the rational use of blood and blood components. So there are three objective elements in this. So this goes as follows. Appropriate licenses for the blood bank should be procured from the concerned authorities. Informed consent should be taken for the transfusion, like risks, benefits, and possible complications should be explained to the patient. And all the transfusion reactions should be reported and documented, and appropriate CAPA to be done. All the forms and the slips that come along with the blood bag should be filled and documented. And there are certain slips which have to go back to the blood bank. So those also have to be documented. Coming to COP5, the documented policies and procedures guide the care of vulnerable patients. So there are 5 objective elements in this. So there should be policies and procedures. They should be in accordance with the national and international guidelines. And vulnerable patients should be identified, and the list should be available with all the departments. Policies should include who is responsible for identifying these patients, the risk management in these kind of patients, and monitoring during the hospital stay. These patients should be assessed for risk of fall, and the same should be documented. So there is a document available which is called as the fall risk assessment. So that particular thing has to be used to assess the risk of fall for the patients. And SOPs should be formulated for care delivery in these particular patients. So also there should be safe and secure environment in the full hospital. So fall preventive measures have to be there, ramps, railings, grab rails, and wheelchair facility should be available. And documented procedures for informed consent should be from a family or legal representative in case the disabled person is not able to give a consent. And training of the staff should be done to help them in taking care of these patients in more efficient way. So they should be periodically done and documented, and training should be done for both adult and pediatric patients. Coming to COP6, documented policies and procedures guide the pediatric services. So there are 4 objective elements in this. So basically the first one is that the scope of the pediatric services should be displayed prominently in the OPD area, and the provisions are made for special care of children, like adequate amenities like special wards should be there. There should be a feeding room with privacy, play area, separate toilets, extra security to prevent child abduction and sexual harassment during the hospital visit. And competent staff should be there who are selected on the basis of qualifications, experience, and training as pertaining to the pediatric patients. And provisions for appropriate ophthalmic evaluation and treatment specific to the pediatric group, like vision assessment, amblyopia assessment, or orthoptic training. So there have to be people who are trained in the care which is required for the pediatric age group. And dietary services may be made available for such patients. Patients assessment includes detailed nutritional growth and immunization assessment by a pediatrician or a physician or an external doctor, and the same should be documented. This can be done using a standard format like checklists. Procedures to address prevention of child abduction or abuse is very important, and adequate security and surveillance is mandatory. So child identification tags or RFIDs, CCTV coverage, and identification of any blind spots which are not covered by the CCTV surveillance, CCTV cameras is also very, very important, because those are the spots where wrong things can happen. And also there should be a code pink team who are trained to assess the child abduction and do the required things during when the code is announced. And rapid response team shall be tested at predefined intervals. So you should have code pink mock drills at regular intervals. COP7 is that the documented procedures guide the care of the patients undergoing parenteral sedation. So there are three objective elements in this. So it's done by credentialed and privileged doctors. So needless to say, they are the anesthesiologists. Patient's vitals, that is the heart rate, cardiac rhythm, BP, SpO2, and level of sedation, they shall be monitored and documented. And these also shall be monitored till the patient recovers. These can be done using a checklist. So you can have a pre-designed checklist for all these parameters. And equipment and manpower are available to manage the patients who have gone into a deeper level of sedation than initially intended. So emergency resuscitation equipment and person trained in airway management should be available during these times. So coming to the next standard, that is COP8, documented procedures guide the administration of anesthesia. That is, there are about 9 objective elements in this. So there should be a documented procedure for administration of anesthesia. You should have a policy and a manual for this. Indications, type of anesthesia and its procedure should be well defined and documented in this particular manual. And pre-anesthetic examination shall be done well before the patient is wheeled into the OT, both for elective and emergency cases in a standardized format. And for daycare setting, the pre-anesthetic examination may be done just before the admission. And the anesthesia plan should be well documented in the case sheets. All the pre-medication, the type of anesthesia, special requirements, and anticipated post-anesthesia care shall also be documented. The anesthesiologist has to sign the OT list on the previous day so that he knows that what kind of cases are going to come and what are the equipments and the other paraphernalia which he has to keep ready in the OT. And in case of LA or topical anesthesia, patient's fitness and suitability shall be assessed prior to the procedure. So immediate pre-induction assessment shall be done by the anesthesiologist just before the wheeling procedure. Any planned changes to the anesthesia plan should be documented. Like for example, if the patient was supposed to undergo under LA, but suddenly you decided that he has to undergo GA, so this has to be documented. And in an emergency setting, a pre-anesthetic examination and pre-induction assessment can be performed immediately or following one another. Informed consent for administration of anesthesia is obtained by the anesthesiologist, and this shall be separate from surgery consents and risks. Surgery consent and the risks, benefits, alternatives of anesthesia shall be explained to the patient and the family. Monitoring during the anesthesia, temperature, pulse, heart rate, cardiac rhythm, respiratory rate, BP, SpO2, and the end tidal carbon dioxide. These also have to be monitored and they should be well documented in the case sheet. The post-anesthesia status is monitored and documented, and this shall be done in the recovery area, which shall include the monitoring of all the vitals till the patient completely recovers from anesthesia. This also shall be done by a trained staff or the anesthesiologist. Time duration for which the patient shall be monitored should be defined by the eye care organization, and this should be present in the policy or the manual. And the transfer of patients from recovery area to the ward should have predefined criteria based on physiologic parameters in consonance with good clinical practice. Adverse anesthesia events, like all the possible adverse anesthesia events, should be listed out and defined by the eye care organization, and appropriate mechanism should be in place for capturing these events. And also proper anesthesia records shall be maintained and documented in case these events happen. And in case of these events, it is very important that a CAPA has to be done, and this has to be well documented in the files. Equipment, procedures, staff, and material errors shall also be noted and corrected. Coming to the next chapter, that is the documented policies and procedures guide the care of patients undergoing diagnostic, lasers, and surgical procedures. So there are about 11 objective elements in this. So first is the surgical patient shall have the preoperative assessment and provisional diagnosis documented by the surgeon prior to the eye surgery. So this has to be done for both elective and emergency cases. Informed consent should be taken prior to the procedure, and all the complications should be explicitly explained, and consent should be taken in detail for the same, and it has to be documented. Prevention of adverse events like wrong site, wrong patient, wrong surgery. So for these, there should be identification bands, cross checks should be done, surgical safety checklist should be done, and timeout should be followed. And these should be actually documented in the patient's records. The credentialing and privileging of persons qualified by law to perform the procedure. So only they perform the procedure. So administration of LA should be done by a qualified medical professional and trained allied health professionals. Ophthalmic technicians or optometrists, they can only assist the surgeon, but per se they are not allowed to do the ophthalmic anesthesia. The credentialing and privileging of the staff has to be assessed periodically according to their level of training. And the brief operative note prior to the transfer out from recovery, that is the procedure performed, the post-operative diagnosis, status of the patient before shifting, name of the surgeon, person administering anesthesia, salient steps of the procedure, and key intraoperative findings shall be documented. Operating surgeon has to document the post-operative care plan as well, like for example the drops, tablets, or any injections to be given. So this has to be documented by the operating surgeon himself. And of course the infection control, whether it is up to date or not, like the OT zoning, unidirectional flow, the division of the OT into sterile, semi-sterile, and sterile areas, the laundry norms, biomedical waste disposals, they all should conform to the HIC practices which are told in the HIC manual. And there should be regular microbiological monitoring as well. So appropriate facilities, equipments and appliances and the instruments should be available in the OT, and there should be a proper documentation of the same. Policy on consumable sharing between the patients, again this is very important. So repackaged material should be checked for open package, floating materials, physical damage, unwanted discoloration, sterility indicators, etc. And there should be a proper policy which should be made for consumable sharing. The quality assurance programs, that is the surveillance activities, so there should be daily monitoring of the humidity and temperature, pressure differentials, integrity of filters, efficacy of OT cleaning and disinfection, and use of biological indicators, the Bovidic test for sterilization process. Everything has to be in place, and these have to be monitored and documented. The quality assurance programs for diagnostic, laser and surgical procedures, that is the key performance indicators, the structure, process and outcomes of these procedures should be documented either in a register or in the proper the records of the patients. Coming to the next chapter, which says that there is a documented policy for and procedures that guide the organ transplant in the eye care organization. There are three objective elements. So the IBank has to follow the legal requirements. All the regulatory licenses and specific permissions should be in place, and relevant medical professionals should be manning the IBank as such, and requisite reports are submitted in a timely manner, and they should incorporate guidelines from national bodies like the EPAI and the AIOS, and documented policies and procedures shall guide the transplant program in consonance with the good clinical practice guidelines which are put up in the institute. And ECO also should ensure that there is education and counseling of the recipient and donor through trained and qualified counselors before transplantation. And the possible risks and benefits shall be explained to make an informed decision. So this also has to be documented. And awareness programs should be conducted periodically by the eye care organization. So this is also an important part of the IBank activities. So coming to the chapter 11, that is documented policies and procedures guide all the research activities in the institute. There are four objective elements in this. So any research undertaken shall be in compliance with the regulatory, national and international guidelines. This could be a funded or non-funded study. It could be a clinical or a basic research or student studies, for example, the MS and DNB students. So even theirs has to be, all this comes in the ambit of this particular chapter. So the ethics committee should be available. They should be registered with appropriate authorities, and the committee has power to discontinue a research trial when the risks outweigh the potential benefits to the patient. And the patient's informed consent should be obtained before entering them into the research protocols, and this should be in a language that the patient understands. And the patients are informed about their right to withdraw from the research, and refusal to participate shall not compromise their access to the organization's services. So this also has to be made clear and this has to be well documented in the patient consent form. So your patient consent form and a consent form for the patient who are recruited in a clinical study, they should be different. Thank you very much.